Chapter 11. Monday, 9 p.m. Confession. Larry was explaining to Riley that we should stop for the night. He felt we deserved to stay in something other than a roadside motel. Using her collapsible baton for emphasis, Riley argued to stop at the first available place. They finally agreed to decide the issue over dinner, which led to another discussion. I stared up through the sunroof at the stars, too drained to listen, too disgusted to care, and too tired to sleep. Gradually, I realized that Riley's voice, soft and angry, was aimed at me. Apparently, the decision over dinner was resolved, and I was back on the agenda. Riley said, "Look at me, Paul. Look at me." I looked. Riley had slid her back against the door to face me and put more distance between us. A bruise was softening her right cheekbone, and she looked at me through narrowed eyes. She didn't rub her jaw, but worked it gently to ease the pain. The bruise on her face seemed to grow while I looked at her. She pointedly refused to acknowledge it by touching even a finger to it. What her fingers acknowledged was the baton still in her hand. She rubbed them up and down it, eyeing me. It wasn't the flat look of a cop, nor was she studying me. When she started tapping the baton's business end into the palm of her other hand, I got the distinct impression she might be considering the best place to put it. And while that was definitely part of it, it wasn't all of it. I was about to find out that Riley was a cop armed with something much more dangerous than a steel baton. A woman's intuition. "Riley," Larry said, his voice sounding nervous. "Oh, sure. It was okay for you good old boys in the good old days. Don't worry, old man. I'm not going to tune him up. Unless he gives me a reason," she said, looking me in the eye. "Harding, you don't remember a damn thing from that night, do you? You don't remember anything before that either." She was looking at Larry when she finished the sentence. And if Larry hadn't turned into a fucking statue, I could have handled it. That was my story, and I never gave Larry an inch late. He claimed I crumpled like a little girl, which was also true. Understandably, Deputy Montoya and I were no longer on a first-name basis. I nodded, and Deputy Montoya angrily shook her head. The hand holding the baton closed around it. I waited for what I so richly deserved. She grunted in disgust and, moving stiffly, slipped the baton back into her boot. As she straightened, she asked, "What do you remember?" Larry reached a long arm into the back seat, held up a palm, and said, "Deputy Montoya, Riley, this isn't our job. We find them, move them, and sometimes babysit them. We're not investigators, especially in this case. This is bureau business, and you know it. Our job is to get this man to Denver. Our only job." She angrily slapped his hand and replied, "Just like you did when you kept checking on him while he was supposedly in a coma? Or afterward when you took him on a long road trip before getting him located? Why go through all that effort? And by the way, you work for the Marshal Service, not the FBI. Might try remembering that." Larry slammed his hand back on the steering wheel, and the knuckles on both hands tightened. But not before I saw a shadow cross his eyes. Riley was not asking anything that I had not asked myself 1,000 times. But not once had I asked Larry. Then the moment passed as Larry thought about how times had changed. He wasn't angry at her for hitting his hand away. He was mad because he came from a time and place where that was grounds for pulling over and settling it man to man. But those times were over, even for mano a mano. And now it was mano a bosswoman. He gritted his teeth, pushed the better times behind him, and kept going. "Paul!" he snapped, pulling my eyes to the rearview mirror. When I dragged my eyes to meet his, he said, "Listen, little sister, before you get carried away answering questions that shouldn't even be asked in the first place, let me point out a few things. If you were working with Dragna, I can't see any way you didn't know that he and Nikki are dangerous sons of bitches. Someone in your business knows things like that." "Riley, let me finish, damn it." Riley glared but sat back. He continued, "So if that's the case, you took Gabriella to meet a man you knew was dangerous. That means Gabriella didn't know what you were up to. Are you following me, Paul?" I blinked and he continued, "Or she was in on it with you. So, Paul, what was it? Did you drag her to meet with a couple of killers, or was she in on it?" Seeing my face, Riley straightened. her hand dipping to the boot with the baton. My hands clenched, my nails once again digging painfully into my palms. Larry's eyes kept reaching for mine in the rearview mirror, not accusatory, but pleading. With a sigh, he said, "How can you even think that, Paul? Look, I have no idea what happened that night, but I know this for certain. You'd never have put Gabriella in danger for any reason. Come on, brother, you know that." Larry glanced over his shoulder at Riley, his brow furrowed with concern. She stared back, her face expressionless. I closed my eyes and tried to take deep breaths. Larry had hit on the only thing I believed to be absolute in my life. He continued, "Riley, they looked, and they looked very, very hard, and never found any connection between Dale and Dragna. None. And I don't give a damn how smart he is. He never had the time to do any cleanup. His whole story is bullshit. You really think he has a meeting, arranges for things to keep going, gets shot, and a little later that night is in a coma for over a year? And the Bureau never finds a fucking thing? Come on." She frowned and shook her head, leaning back to Gabriella's favorite position, legs almost tucked under her, the sheathed baton inches from her fingertips. She studied me, analytically and without compassion. Then she turned her head to Larry. She said, "He lied to us just now. That changes everything, and you know it. In case you forgot, I'm a federal agent. You don't lie to federal agents." He laughed and said, "We get lied to all the fucking time by our witnesses." Her mouth twitched before her sore jaw could quelch the rebellion. "That's not what I mean, and you know it," she stiffly replied. He kept his eyes on the road, but took a hand off the wheel to waggle a finger. "All he can do is tell what he knows or thinks he knows. And all that matters is that he remembers seeing Nikki shoot him and his wife. Right, Paul?" I nodded and said as firmly as possible, "Yes." Riley's eyes darted between the back of Larry's smug face and my split image. "And this is the story you're sticking with?" Larry replied slowly, emphasizing each word. "Deputy, this is the story everyone has agreed to. You're telling me that the FBI and Gibaldi bought off on this after he supposedly woke up?" Larry said, "Sure. Of course they never came to see him. I take that back. Gibaldi sent some weenie, Willard or Willis, something like that, to blow smoke up our ass." The next 10 miles were in complete silence. From the look on Riley's face, it might have turned into 500 miles if Larry hadn't finally spoken. "I don't know what's up. I mean, sure, we have to move him. But why all of this interest in what he knows about Dragna? Why now?" After another 10 miles, she replied, "They think you," she said, looking directly at me, "are dirty." I shook my head and looked down at the floor. A dull, throbbing numbness crept over me, and I slumped forward. The problem was that I agreed entirely with them. It was why my wife was dead. Maybe that was why I couldn't seem to die. I didn't deserve to join her. I felt Riley move, and I glanced up. Her look told me not to move an inch. She was shifting in her seat to look at Larry in the rearview mirror, who had suddenly developed driver discipline and stared at the road. The icy look in her eyes made it clear that, for once, Larry's eyes weren't working. Larry coughed and said, "Riley, I say we forget it happened. Our job is simple. Why make it complicated? You asked. He said he didn't recall ever meeting Dragna or Nikki. We hear that shit all the time. For once, it's true. Trust me. Someone screwed the pooch and dropped the ball. Now Paul's face is all over the internet and questions are being asked. Riley, it's not our problem. We had to extract him. The rest of it is not our business." She leaned back against her side, and I watched the wheels turn in those dark eyes. Suddenly, they shot up at me. Embarrassed, I looked away. While looking at me, she told Larry, "Huh, you're right. After all the bullshit, he said he couldn't recall meeting Dragna or Nikki. Is that the truth, Paul? You can't recall meeting them?" I closed my eyes, told myself to man up, do the right thing, and wondered why it was so damn hard. "I'm sorry," I said, without looking up. "What? I mean, why? Are you saying you do recall?" she asked in a soft, dangerous voice. I forced myself to look her in the eye. "No, I'm sorry that I hurt you. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to end all of this. I really want this to end. And no, I don't recall either one of those fucks. But I agree with you that I'm dirty. It's the only fucking thing that makes sense. Larry suddenly braked. After being tossed into the back of the front seats, Riley and I strained to look out the windshield. Nothing showed in the headlights as he pulled to a stop on the shoulder and turned off the engine. Unclipping his seatbelt, he twisted around to face me. Both of us recoiled from the anger on his face. Paul, enough of this goddamn shit. Remember me? Okay, let's say the FBI geeks couldn't find anything because you are some fucking genius. And let's say you and Dragna are too smart to get tied together. Oh, well, except when you take your wife to meet him. You with me? I met his stare unafraid. There are advantages to not giving a shit whether you live or die, especially when you prefer the die option. His eyes turned to steel. Tell you what, Paul, I'll let you out right here. You have to promise not to toss yourself in front of a car or semi. I don't want to be responsible for someone getting killed. Find some other way to do it. There's a railroad track over there. Go lie down and wait. But first, tell me what you found out, because I damn well know you've been looking. And we both know that things come to you as you go back in time before the hit. There is no way you haven't found something. Anything. Just tell me what it is. I don't know how long we sat there, rocked by passing vehicles and listening to the engine ticking as it cooled. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. It wasn't that I didn't know the answer. I did. It just didn't make sense, because Dragna and I lived on different planets, as far as I knew. I couldn't find anything, I finally said. He nodded, and Riley continued to study me, cold, skeptical, but curious. Why can't you accept that? He asked me, his eyes softening. Because it doesn't make sense. The restaurant video shows Nicky coming into the restaurant to meet Dragna. Then it shows him leave right before Gabriella and I left for the show. Then there are videos of a man, same clothes, same retro little ponytail, same hat, same fucking coat, running away seconds after we were shot, from the exact spot where the police found us. He opened his mouth and I cut him off. Yeah, none of the footage or the witnesses was enough for Gibaldi. That's where I come in. But all of you know he did it. You've told me that 1,000 fucking times. And I've studied the video. I've worked it. The guy in the restaurant is the same build, posture, and height as Nicky. You all have hundreds of hours of surveillance on Dragna and Nicky. I've worked every second of it using shit you guys don't even have. It was Nicky. That part is dead certain. Larry hit the seat with his hand and said, Yeah, but that doesn't mean you had anything to do with their crap. Come on, Larry. Seriously? You think maybe I just looked at him wrong? I've read all your fucking files on these guys. Dragna and Nicky are pros. Dragna has an MBA from Harvard, and Nicky is ex-CIA. They're not gangbangers. And they don't find some guy living in his mother's basement to handle cyber ops. They find someone like me, someone with clearances and connections. And that guy is kept in deep cover. And yeah, I am so damn good that I could hide everything from myself. In fact, that's exactly how I go about it. Somehow, something went sideways. Something went completely off the rails, and they had to move. And whatever it was got Gabriella killed. End of fucking story. I had more to say, but I stopped because Larry looked at me in disbelief as Riley stared at him. It took a moment. I grunted in disgust. Riley, no, Larry didn't give me anything. Not one little shred. Remember what I used to do for a living? I was the one who put in the hunting traps for a lot of Homeland Security. I have, or had anyway, clearances higher than either of you. I completely lost my memory from the time of the shooting back 3 months, after which much of it was fuzzy for quite a while. But I didn't lose my knowledge, skills, or stuff a guy like me has hidden on servers worldwide. Riley shook her head. So now you're confessing to hacking our systems? Oh, let me guess. You don't really remember hacking, do you? Your fucking memory is more selective than my niece's eating habits. I looked out the window. Riley had no idea how selective my memory was. Neither did Larry. Not really. He had retired by the time Dr. Weeble found me and explained the pros and cons of his magic gel. So why didn't you go ask Nicky? Don't tell me the great wizard couldn't find him, she demanded. That's exactly the problem. I couldn't find the bastard. He's off the grid, and I can't get a whiff of a trail. Dragna I can find anytime I want, but not Nicky. I thought he'd come looking for me when I moved last time, but he didn't. And yeah, The video of you outdrawing a guy going for his cell phone makes it easy and unnecessary for him to look for me. All Nikki or Dragna has to do now is put out a contract. Hell, even Chuck can find me. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound critical. Riley's mouth tightened into a thin line. Larry groaned, turned around, and stared out the front windshield. Riley leaned forward, her brown eyes inches from mine. Well, if I had known you were going to try to off yourself, I would have left you there. Tell you what, Harding, when we get back on the road and you want to bail, just tell me. Those seatbelts can be so complicated for you geniuses. I thought about telling her why I wanted to end things, but I wasn't sure where to start. Running out of time? Seriously bad death headed my way? Tired of watching people avert their eyes? A last real shot at getting Gibaldi to pull the trigger on Nikki? Sometimes you just say fuck it, I told her. For the next 20 miles, no one spoke. When Larry took an off-ramp and headed towards Hotel Alley, it brought back memories of the road trip Larry took me on while his bosses struggled to figure out what to do with me. A marshal, even a marshal escorting a witness, is like any other government employee, except politicians. They have to live on a per diem, and Larry was a master of stretching every penny. He had strict standards. The establishment had to have a bar, a happy hour with appetizers, and, of course, a complimentary buffet breakfast. Finally, the establishment had to be located no more than a short walk to the local watering hole, somewhere to go after the 2-for-1 happy hour was over. Being a professional witness wrangler, Larry took it to the next step. He not only knew the locations of motels and hotels in virtually every town across the country, he knew which ones shared space with the local watering holes. Larry checked us in by himself, and we kept to ourselves while living off free pizza, tacos, sloppy joes, and chicken wings. And, of course, draft beer, not watered-down happy hour drinks. After happy hour, we went to the local watering holes, small, dark places where the patrons greeted him as Agent Larry. No one seemed to know what kind of agent, only that he was a fed of some sort who passed through on his way to do something to someone. He was like the poet of ancient times, before records, movies, radio, and TV. Larry would have been a podcast superstar if he'd been born 30 years later. After appropriate encouragement, Larry would begin telling his stories. When about him, they were always at his expense, and ended with him barely surviving and barely keeping his job. Ranchers, farmers, gamblers, thieves, cops, used car salesmen, and preachers hooted with laughter at his stories and bought rounds for the house. Then there were times when he told the inside stories about gangsters in the Golden Age, the Al Capones and Bugsy Siegels, and the men who hunted them. The room would grow quiet, and he was often asked to pause so everyone could get a refill without missing anything. They were stories before his time, but filled with knowledge and insights of a career living with people in the life. And contrary to what I had seen on TV, the scarier the bar, the warmer the greeting, and more free beer. Always just beer. And what was my role in Larry's traveling roadshow? Usually I was an HR staffer sent to the field to better understand field personnel. The used car salesmen loved me. For once, they were no longer at the bottom of the barrel. Larry surprised me by pulling into a major brand hotel adjacent to a golf course. There wasn't an acceptable watering hole within a mile. Riley removed my shackles, and we sat in silence. The problem was obvious. What to do with me while discussing me. Larry kept glancing at Riley's right eye as it slowly developed a dark purple shade. Finally, he took me aside and pointed. Go in the side door over there. The restrooms are just down the hall. All these are laid out the same way. Take your time, get washed up, and put these on when you go through the lobby to meet us in the restaurant. Try not to drown yourself in the fucking toilet. I felt him slip something into my shirt pocket as I walked past him. In the men's room, a man at one of the sinks lectured 2 small boys about the need to wash their hands. He glanced at me, cut it short, and bundled them off, keeping himself between them and me. I saw what the father saw, and also what he didn't see in the mirror when I washed my hands. If I had been him, I would have checked out of the hotel and kept driving. I was used to the effect that my scarred face had on people, but the man staring back at me looked more than disfigured. He looked demented. His eye sockets were hollow. and the skin of his face stretched drumhead tight over his cheekbones. Tiny dots of dark red were scattered on his face and neck, as though a shotgun had peppered him with birdshot. The bloodshot eyes were straight out of a B-movie. That was what the man saw. I was pretty sure he didn't see the woman behind me in the mirror. She was as beautiful as I was ugly, which was harder to believe than she was a spirit. And as I stared at her, I gradually realized I might be having an epiphany. I wasn't sure. Self-awareness had never been a strength of mine. It made sense. I had tried to end it all and was just admitting to myself that even at that moment, when overwhelming despair at failing flooded through me, I had also felt a wave of guilty relief. And the drive down the highway had brought back memories of good times with Larry when I was grieving. Yet, as I stared at my beautiful wife, wondering what she was trying to tell me, I knew it was more than my cue ball bouncing off the other balls on the table. It was dawning on me how little I remembered of her. The fog hiding my memories went back in time, around 3 months. The farther back in time, the more and more memories emerged. I believed I remembered almost everything, with no more than the typical delusional distortion a year before the shooting. Looking at Gabriella, I realized that I had been wrong. Yes, there were a few memories, like the night we almost finished a Chinese takeout dinner. But damn few even when I reached back over the years we had been married before her death. It came to me that I had known this for a long time. I knew that this woman's beauty, captivating voice, and overwhelming sexual presence were what I remembered. The mystery was not what she was thinking, but who she was, and what our life together had been. I had thrown myself into a chaotic quest for vengeance. And for what? Love? Looking at her in the mirror, I knew the answer. I did it for love, because how could anyone not love a woman like the one looking into my eyes? And that was the flash, revelation, bombshell, or perhaps epiphany. I had never known the woman I loved, only why I should love her. Still, I had done something that ended her life. Gabriella, if I have time, I will find Nicky. I thought I could track him down, but I couldn't, so I'll bring him to me. I owe you that. Honestly, I have more faith in bringing him to me than in killing him, but I will try my best. Gabriella, I don't have much time left, so while waiting for him to come to me, I'm going to try to remember how to live. I tore my eyes from the mirror and scrubbed my hands as though trying to wash away the grime of months lost, searching for a man I was starting to believe I may have never met. When I looked up, she was gone. Seeing something poking from my shirt pocket, I pulled it out. Larry had slipped in a pair of black-framed sunglasses. I slipped them on, and the monster became a scary-looking dude, the kind of dude who finishes what he starts. Okay, it wasn't really me, but what the hell? It was better than what came in. We nodded to one another, straightened our shoulders, and walked back into the world.